Now, hopefully you enjoyed your lunchtime chatting. I have to say I had some really good conversations, and it was really great to hear people genuinely wanting to do the right thing, to improve, and to have the hard discussions. There were some reminders that everything that we're talking about today, even though they're giving information, it does need to be contextualised back to your own farm and your own conditions. So remember to seek that advice and do your own research before you make any decisions. So just a bit of a disclaimer there. Just remember that you've got to apply the knowledge to your own farm and your own system. Did I get that right, Simon? He's nodding. Yeah, that's good. Excellent. All right, so we've got another cracking session after lunch today. I'm really, really excited to take a bit of a turn on what we're going to be talking about. And this time we're going to look at spray behaviour and the psychological complexities of achieving best practice spray application. And to deliver this session, we are very proud to welcome Professor Saravana Kumar, who works with the Allied Health and Health Services Research Team for UniSA. Now, Professor Kumar is the Professor, as I mentioned, of Allied Health and Health Services Research at Allied Health and the Health Performance Unit at UniSA. He is also the inaugural Professor of Allied Health, SA Health, and he is a physiotherapist by trade and has more than 2 decades of clinical research and teaching experience. So really great to have you here with us today. We can't wait to hear your presentation. Let's make him welcome.
Thanks, Belinda. That was a really lovely introduction, and I must use you to teach our students, because when I ask them to come back for a class, they never do, and you managed to get everyone at the same time. So thank you again, everyone, for asking me to be here and share some of the work we've been doing in terms of looking at the literature on how to achieve best practice in spray behavior. So the plan for today is I always get worried. I look at my presentation schedule and I think, when is my presentation? And post-lunch sessions are always a worry for me, because everyone has had a nice meal and everyone is feeling nice and relaxed, and then I tend to put them to sleep. So I've tried to keep this presentation as light as possible, and there's always times for questions afterwards. So the aim for the next 30 to 40 minutes, what I plan to talk to you about is the philosophy of using current evidence to underpin practice, and the complexities about implementing best practice. It's much easier to say than to actually do it. And I'll talk very briefly about the science of what we call as implementation science, and then talk about current evidence about behavior change and sustaining that behavior change, and then finally link it back to the work that we are doing at the present time in this area. I do want to acknowledge GPSA for supporting this work, and also the Spray Drift Working Group members as well. Even though I am presenting today, there is a team of other people, Esther, Tien, and Sue and Iyo, who are also contributing to this particular work. I do have to flag that I am not an expert in this area, and that's because the word expert comes from Latin. Ex is a has-been, and spurt is a drip under pressure. And like many of you, I get nervous about statistics, and given that I work at a university, I deal with large amounts of paperwork, large amounts of information, and it freaks me out all the time. I'm a physio by trade, not a psychologist, but where my interest intersects with your work is looking at how to implement best practice in health. So what I'm going to do is slightly take a detour away from farming and talk more from a health, and then I'll move back to farming in 10-15 minutes' time. So you might say to me, Saravana, that is all jolly good, and I noticed Belinda flagged that research is good, but we have to contextualize it to what we do in our farm. So why is it important for us to use evidence? It's a good question. A lot of people ask me, why do we have to use current knowledge, current evidence to implement best practice? The best example I can give you actually happens almost 2 centuries ago in UK, in London particularly. There was a cholera epidemic, and people were dying by the thousands. And they really didn't know what was causing it. And people used to think cholera was caused by air. Now we know it's waterborne. And the way they used to treat cholera was by venesection, which is draining blood. So what they used to do is to drain blood for people, and the assumption was a new blood will essentially be free of cholera. And then there was a guy called Jon Snow, and no, it's not the dude from Game of Thrones, because my students often think it's that dude. It's not. It's another good-looking dude down there. What Jon Snow did was he said, let's look at where people were presenting with cholera. Where were we having all these deaths? And each black dot you see on the screen essentially is one person dying from cholera. And when they looked at where most of the people from cholera were dying, they were dying in a particular street in London, in the Soho district in London called Broad Street. And then Jon Snow went and looked at Broad Street and said, what the heck is going on in Broad Street? Why are people all around Broad Street dying? And what they noticed was there was a water pump, and people were getting drinking water from this water pump. And when we looked at what was happening with the water pump, what became clear was the line for the drinking water and the sewer line were right next to each other. So there was a small leak from the sewer line that was coming into the water, drinking water, and as soon as they figured that out, and all Jon Snow did was he removed the handle for the water pump. As soon as he removed the handle for the water pump, cholera disappeared. And the way he worked that out is purely by looking at data, looking at research to say what is actually going on here. So when we think about in health, about using current knowledge, current evidence into practice, we call that as evidence-based practice. Using current contemporary knowledge and research to inform what we do clinically to our patients. And that's why things like mortality rate for breast cancer, for example, has reduced drastically, because we are using current contemporary knowledge. The proton therapy building in North Terrace, once the machine is organized, will also have a significant impact on cancer mortality rates, again, using current best evidence. However, just because something we know works in research, just because something we know works in the literature, doesn't necessarily mean it always works in practice. I've given you 3 examples here, and what do all these 3 things have in common? So one is a collar that we wear for our neck after we have a whiplash. The other one is antibiotics, and the last one is an X-ray for low back pain. What do all these 3 things have in common? All 3 things have in common is they actually don't work for a lot of people. The soft cervical collar for whiplash actually causes more harm than good. The X-ray that we get for low back pain, acute low back pain, meaning it's very new, that the damage that comes from the radiation is far worse than the diagnostic value. Antibiotics for the common cold is viral, and yet many doctors continue to prescribe antibiotics, which is bacterial. Again, does not work. So we know that just because we have good evidence, just because we have good literature, it doesn't necessarily mean it's just translated, it works in clinical practice. Why? The reason is called evidence practice gap. There was a seminal study, one of the first studies that was done many centuries ago, looking at scurvy. As many of you would know, back in the day, the primary form of transport was ships, and sailors used to get scurvy because they never got access to fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. And as a result, they'll spend months on end in the sea and end up with a bone disease called scurvy. James Lind was a medical doctor in Royal Navy, and he figured out if you give people citrus, if you give people lemon juice, it completely cured scurvy. They didn't actually get scurvy at all. But it took them 50 years before that evidence, that knowledge, became common practice. Okay, 50 years before it became common practice in the Royal Navy. And the reason we know that is why that happens is because just because we have good research, good evidence, doesn't necessarily mean it's translated, it's implemented in practice for a number of reasons. Because we know that evidence is only one component. There are other factors that we need to take into account clinically. So as a clinician, as a physio, when I talk to my mates about using current evidence to inform practice, I also have to take into account where they work, the environment in which they work in. Because the resources we have in a Burnside hospital is very different to the resources we have at Sejuna, for example. I have to take into account the skill of the clinician, a new graduate, the students that I teach, their skill level is very different to some of my mates who graduated with me 20 years ago. So evidence alone is not enough. There are other factors that plays a role. Because what we recognize is that change problem, changing behavior, changing knowledge, changing attitudes, draws on questionable assumptions about human behavior, right? It is true in some instances, but it's not always true in every single instance. For example, many of us suffer from what we call as intention behavior gap. I went to my GP, I'm in my late 40s. I went to my GP a few weeks ago, and my GP said, Sarvana, you're Indian. And that was like, okay, I'm Indian, right? He said, Indian people don't store their fat in the muscles. You guys store your fat in your arteries. It's just a genetic thing. So you need to do more exercise. You need to eat more healthily. You need to do more exercise. And so I said, all right, I would like to live a bit longer. I've got mortgages to pay off, so I better stay around for a bit longer. So I went and bought myself a new A6 shoe and also got some activewear, because my students tell me if you wear activewear, you're more likely to be active. And then I live in Adelaide, in a place near Prospect, and so I wore my new activewear, I wore my new shoes, walked all the way down to Prospect, and there's a nice bakery for any of you go down to Prospect. Prospect called Murati. So I went there, got a coffee and cake because I walked all the way. I went back home and I never have not worn it again, right? I have very good intention. I have good intentions, right? I have good intention because I know as a health professional I should exercise. The doctor has told me being Indian, which I cannot change, means I'm more likely to be at high risk of heart disease. I have the knowledge, I have the means, I'm able to afford new pairs of shoes, I'm able to afford activewear. So I have all the tools I need, but it doesn't translate into behavior. And it's not just me, so I'm not going to feel bad just myself, because there's so much evidence about healthy eating. We all know we should eat healthily, and yet we rarely do. We all know we should be responsibly drinking, and yet every day when I'm watching Maps or another TV show, there's an ad that comes on and says, you should drink responsibly. Driving, wearing seatbelts. There's a new ad about wearing seatbelts, and we know the impact of not wearing seatbelts, and even being physically active. So there is a problem. There is this problem that just because we have good research, just because we have good evidence, it doesn't automatically translate into behavior. People have good intentions, but it doesn't always translate into behavior. Why? Why is it? Because to change behavior in people, we need to understand what are the drivers. What drives them? For some, it might be research. For some, it might be evidence. They might say, there is this new technology that I want to get hold of, so I want to use it. For some, it might be tangible benefit. So you might say, if I use this particular thing, I'm able to make more money. I'm able to be recognized by my peers. For others, it might be about having support for change. You need support from a number of different people to make that change happen. For others, it might be fear. There might be litigation. That might be you might be sued. You might have a fine. For others, it might be a disincentive. If I use this, potentially, I may lose money, so I won't use that. Or for others, it might be pressure from others, like family, friends, etc. In simple terms, what that means is that one approach doesn't work for everyone. Because what drives my behavior will be very different to what drives Belinda's behavior or Nick's behavior. So we've got to understand that. And that's where the science called implementation science has really become very popular, where we look at how can we help clinicians and other people change their behavior. And essentially this draws on lots of theories about behavior change, understanding the complexities of how people actually make that behavior change. And essentially, we look at things like working together, interaction. So one of the main reasons forums like this are very useful is for you to have that interaction, listen to a number of different people, engaging with stakeholders, working with a number of different people, not just one particular stakeholder, but a number of different stakeholders, and making sure that what we put in place addresses a real problem, not just something we think it's a problem. So in the health sphere, what we know works consistently in changing behavior are a number of different things. Firstly, things like when I'm talking to my clinicians and saying to them, you need to provide practice that is based on current evidence. If I just send them a piece of paper, they don't read it. It goes in the bin, right? Instead, what works are things like going and visiting, talking to them, engaging with our clinicians, giving them evidence, providing them with tools to help them implement the behavior. And if you think about that one industry that seems to have done that quite well is the pharmaceutical industry, who goes and visits GPs, gives them all the resources they need. So next time they're prescribing you a drug, they will look at the medicine and go, oh, this is from Johnson & Johnson, so I should possibly use their drug to prescribe this particular issue for the patient. So now we're starting to understand how to achieve that behavior change in clinicians and others. So now that I've given you an overview about the health aspect, I'm going to bring you guys back from the farming aspect point of view. So this is where you might say, all right, Saravana, I'm glad to hear about health, but we are from a farming community. What does all this mean from a farming point of view? Well, when we looked at the literature, we are starting to find some research on this area. One of the seminal works was published by a guy called Rose in UK, where they looked at understanding how to influence farmers' decision-making behavior. So they looked at over 200 papers across the literature, and they summarized that when you are thinking about changing individual farmers' behavior, there are a number of strategies we need to use. Firstly, the messages need to be carefully targeted to the needs of the farmers, just like clinicians, because not every clinician is the same, not every farmer is the same. Thinking about sustained knowledge exchange activities, things like workshops, things like forums, etc. It can't just be one. It has to be sustained over a period of time. Proving the value and ease of adoption. So if you are going to be using a new technology, what is the value in it for you and how easy it is for you to use it? Providing incentives to change your behavior. Incentives doesn't mean money. Might be one, but there may be other reasons why you might do it. And possibly nudging, helping nudge that behavior change. But what they also found is you can't just influence individual farmers' behavior. Farming doesn't happen in isolation. You are part of a much bigger ecosystem. So what Rose talks about is you need to also look at a much larger ecosystem, looking at social and organizational change, involving family and friends, informal and formal ways of communicating with farmers. So this might be farm workshops, but also it might be things like advertisements, etc. Recruiting peer champions, and investing in further training and research to support farmers achieve that behavior change. So that's one of the articles that we found. And then in 2013, there was another really interesting article that was called the Value of Advice Report. Again, this comes from UK, looking at, it was written for the Agricultural Industry Confederation. And what they wanted, what they were looking was they looked at farmers and professional advisors. And essentially what the question they wanted to know was, how can the commercial sector include the agri-supply industries, deliver professional advice to farmers? So when we are delivering professional advice to farmers, how can we achieve that? How can we do that? And they came up with this really nice infographic where they called it as this value of confidence, circle of confidence. So basically what they said was, there is a circle. There are people who are within the inner circle of the farmers, and so that's the one you can see in the white, where family members, vets, bankers, land agents, etc. And then there is this outer circle, government agencies and so on. So if you want to engage with farmers, you really need to think about who are in the inner circle, because they are more likely to have a greater impact compared to those in the outer circle. So these were some of the background literature that helped us to frame these two questions. And what we wanted to know was two things. What are the factors that influence and determine farmers and agricultural workers' behavior? So what influences behavior? And second, what interventions have been trialed? What has been shown to work? As a result, we are now currently doing a scoping review. And essentially a scoping review maps the literature. Now you might say to me, Saravana, why are you doing this? I'm sure you can get a group of people together and work it out. The problem is you need to have confidence in saying the advice we give you was not developed over a bottle of wine or gin and tonic or whatever. Because that's how we used to do in health. People used to get together and then come up with guidelines. So this is a much more robust process. So essentially, we're looking at farmers and agricultural workers. The concept we are interested in are behavior and attitude modification, and the context that we are interested in are farming and agricultural practices. From that, we developed a very comprehensive search strategy, which is looking at the literature in a robust and rigorous manner, and we looked at a number of different databases. And so just to show you that we did do the work and we're just not making stuff up. So here are some of the terms that we use to look at the literature as well. And we looked at a number of different databases. So these are all the databases where literature on farming and other behavior change literature is likely to be published. And we also used Google and Google Scholar to find what we call as gray literature. And the reason we look at both is because we know studies which report positive findings are more likely to be published in peer-reviewed literature, and studies that report negative findings are not necessarily likely to be published in peer-reviewed literature. So we look at both commercially produced and gray literature. And then we have a set of criteria to work out what's in and what's out. And there are a series of steps that we undertake, essentially starting from searching the literature, going through step by step, and ultimately selecting those articles that forms our review paper. And the reason we do this is so that this process is transparent. So tomorrow when you might come and say to me, Sarvana, how did you come up with this recommendation? I can track back and say to you, here is the evidence that we actually identified that informs this particular recommendation, and it's not just my personal opinion. And then we extracted a number of different things from each of the study, where it was published, the design that they used, the intervention that they used, the characters, and any limitations from the evidence base as well. And then from that, we have now starting to synthesize and analyze the data. So now I'm going to, for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to show you the results from our studies, from our work that we are doing. Just a word of caution, just remember this is still work in progress, so this is likely to change in the next few weeks as we are finalizing this work. So what did we find? We found over 780 citations in the literature on those two topics, looking at what influences farming behavior and what interventions have been trialed. From that, we narrowed it down to 13 studies to meet our inclusion criteria. We excluded studies that was not particularly focusing on use of herbicides and pesticides. So we excluded studies which are looking at things like green farming, looking at environmental impact, because or personal health impacts, that's not of interest to us. From that, we identified 13 different studies specifically on this topic. They were published from 2012 to 2024, and they came from 8 different countries. Interestingly, none of the studies were actually conducted in Australia. So straight away, we have this knowledge gap specific to our context. And most of the studies were what we call as cross-sectional. Cross-sectional means you measure people at one point in time. And the reason that's a problem is you do not know what happened before the measurement or after the measurement. So not only did we not have any studies from Australia, the type of studies that was done was also a bit limited. The reason I'm flagging with you is now you can start to see the recommendations. We need to be careful in how much value we place in them as well. From that, we identified 11 studies that exclusively focused on farmers only. There was one study which looked at farmers and other stakeholders, representative farmers' unions, local environmental organizations, water utility. And there was one study which also looked at commercial pesticide applicators as well. The number of people included in the studies varied from 22 up to nearly 1,000 people. Most of the farmers were male, and I'm looking across, that's kind of representative, I think, in the literature. Most were men from the ages of between 41 to 50, and included a range of different farming, grain, fruit, vegetable, peanut, cotton, livestock, etc. And majority of the farmers who participated in these studies actually had 10 years of experience, which means they have had a good track record in this area. All the studies included how to influence farmers' behavior. When we mapped all this information, what we found was many of the studies used a theory that we also use in health, which is called theory of planned behavior. Very common theory in psychology that we come across. Basically, it's a psychological framework that draws on 3 behavioral constructs. First one is attitude. So this is basically refers to the degree to which an individual perceives this behavior as desirable, beneficial, or useful. Like me with exercise, right? I have good attitude. I think it's beneficial for me to do exercise and eat less Red Rock deli chips. I understand that. Subjective norm is the next category, which refers to social influences or pressures affecting individual regarding performing or not performing the behavior. The only reason I went to the doctor was because my wife would not keep quiet. She was like, you keep complaining of chest pain, I cannot deal with a dead person in my house, so go to the doctor. So that was my social influence for me, right? So she was my social influence to get me to the doctor, because we know men are far less likely to go to the doctor than women. And the last one is perceived behavioral control, which relates to individuals' own perceived capabilities and control to perform that particular action. Again, I know how to exercise. I'm a physio by trade, for God's sake, right? I know how to exercise. I know what to do. I've got the resources to do so. So across all three, it should work for me. Yeah, and that's what theory of planned behavior says. So when we look at farmers' behavior and intention, essentially we can map all these different factors across these three. Okay, attitude, norms, and perceived control. In addition to it, over time, people, what the literature also says is they've added more things to it. So things like moral norms, is it morally right for us to do? And Belinda was saying, many of you feel that this is the morally right thing to do in terms of managing spray drift. It's also about knowledge. How much knowledge do you have in terms of managing with pesticides and pest control? Personal innovativeness. I know when I talk to my clinician friends, I say, because they're very hard to change their practice, and say there's one group that is very innovative, that engages with technology quite well, is actually farmers. Research tells us farmers are the ones who tend to pick up technology the most quickly compared to many other groups. Things like social organization, so the environment, the social environment that you work in. All these kind of feeds into the theory of behavior change. So you might say to me, Saravana, for the last half an hour we've heard you speak. What does this all mean to us as farmers? There is consistent evidence to suggest that attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control significantly influence farmers' intention. So the work we and the GPSA board will do is to try and address all these different factors, because we know that influences behavior. A really critical, important factor is knowledge. And that's why you're engaging with companies that give you the machines, give you the information, is to improve your knowledge. And we also know is that all those three different constructs don't work by itself. They are significantly over-related. They kind of mix together, interrelated. Right, so now that we know what influences farmers' behavior, how do you change it? How can we change it? That was our next question. For that, we looked at the literature, and we've only found 2 studies that have actually done that, implemented interventions to change behavior. One was looking at training farmers on how best to use pesticides, and the other one was an awareness-focused approach for mitigating diffuse water pollution. Again, summary, both studies reported improved knowledge, beliefs, and awareness from doing that. So what did they do? The first one was a study that was done in Greece with 82 cotton farmers. Again, not broadacre farmers, cotton farmers. And what they did was they had a training session where they looked at use of spraying equipment, application parameters, use of personal equipment, and the risks associated with personal health and environment. And the training was provided by research unit of agricultural institutes and major agrochemical companies. What did they find? They found that those farmers who were trained with these particular training programs significantly had higher knowledge, had improved beliefs about pesticide control, safety behavior compared to non-trained farmers. So we know that particular model of approach where helping educate and train farmers does have a positive impact. The second study was done in UK over a 5-year period. So this is a much longer duration. And they used what we call as mixed methods, which is quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative is measurement, where they measured analysis of water quality, and qualitative is they interviewed farmers afterwards. And the intervention was they gave them information packs and also weed wiper hires. And they looked at the use of weed wipers and advised films on safe measures of pesticide application. What did they find? Quantitatively, they demonstrated there was a change in change in pesticide concentration. So they had 2 groups, the intervention group and the control group. Both groups got better, but the intervention group had a much significant improvement compared to the control group. And there was also substantial declines across all the groups that received that particular intervention. Qualitatively, they also demonstrated that there was improved awareness, there was improved attitudes to weed wiper technology in terms of how easy it was to use and financial benefits, and the psychosocial factors Not just knowledge and skills, but the psychosocial factors like family, friends, all that also had a positive influence. And the financial benefits was a double-edged sword. While it was a motivator for some, it was a barrier for some others as well. So this is the kind of work we are currently doing to bring the evidence together. But remember what I said to you before when we talked about clinician and clinical practice. What we are providing is that evidence. It needs to be contextualized. What does it mean for your context? What does it mean for your farming community? This is where you need to bring together your knowledge, skills, attitudes with the environment in which you work in, along with that particular research evidence. So the key take-home message I want to leave you with is changing human behavior is complex. Okay? It's not as simple as here is the evidence, here is the knowledge, here is the technology, go do it. It's not as easy. And farmers are no different. It's not difficult in farmers, it's just difficult in human beings generally. Whether you work in healthcare, whether you work in farming, it's a difficult one. What is also very clear is one single strategy alone is not effective. You cannot have a single universal strategy that will achieve behavior change across. And that's because we all learn and do things differently. Tomorrow, if I have a heart attack, God forbid, I've got to go to Brunei on Sunday, so hopefully that's not happening. But if I do have a heart attack tomorrow, guess what? I'll probably will take up walking and start wearing my Asics and activewear more often. Okay? Because that will trigger me and go, I need to do something. What research tells us is a holistic approach that targets different levels, brings in different stakeholders. The evidence seems to say has the maximal impact from a behavior change point of view. But there are gaps. Like I showed you before, we did not find a single study in Australia on this particular topic, nor did we find a study that was specifically targeting spray behavior, spray drift. But what we can do is to learn from other farming communities in other jurisdictions and learn from it and apply it into our particular context. Okay? So once again, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you to GPSA for supporting and doing this wonderful forum. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Really great to hear from you, and I loved hearing some of the different ways of thinking. Now, just a question. I'm going to kick things off. When you talk about change and how we can influence change as an industry, is there any tips that you could give us individually to be more open to change? Like my children are doing growth mindset at school, and they do the gratitude and empathy and mindfulness, which is all about being more open to change and learning. Any tips that you have for us in the room about how we can be more open and receptive to change?
Good question, Belinda. And not an easy one to answer.
In a sentence.
And the reason it's not an easy one to answer is because you have to work out what's the driver for you. What is in it for you? What drives you to make that behavior change? And the reason is we as human beings are creatures of habit, and it's very hard for us to change it. So if you want to change our behavior, the thing you need to think about is, why are you doing it? What's in it for you? What are the drivers? And I can guarantee you, for all of you, the drivers will be different. And even for your own children, Belinda, different child will have different drivers. For some, it might be genuinely they do want to improve themselves. For others, you might have to bribe them with some chocolates or whatever. For others, it might be that they can see a goal that they want to attain. So really, it's about, why am I doing this? And the messaging has to target that why.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Did I have any questions? Did you have one, Sam or Peter?
I'm pretty interested in human behaviour and why people make decisions. But the one concept I think has been overlooked potentially is the pressures of farming, which would encourage people to make wrong decisions. Perhaps that's a position when 2022, where there was excessive wet weather, disease in crops, huge pressure to access paddocks, perhaps when it was questionable. Perhaps it's financial difficulties. Various farms have been under successive years of drought or other factors. Could be low grain prices. There's a massive amount of pressure to try and achieve maximum yield and profitability and sustainability. Are you incorporating those social pressures in your program?
Yeah, it's a great question and a good point. And I did capture it in terms from a sociological perspective. As human beings, we live in a society, and there are a number of other social pressures that comes with it, and part of it are the pressures associated with farming. So as part of the review, we are capturing what the social pressures are. The challenge we have is you can't always address or control for the social pressures. It's about acknowledging what the social pressures might be and what tools you can provide to farming communities. In the health space, for example, I can tell you ramping is hugely problematic at the moment in the healthcare sector. So when I talk to my clinicians and say, what evidence or how best are you using current knowledge to improve practice, they come back at me straight away and they say, Sarwana, we can barely see enough patients because we are so overloaded with work that's coming through, and you're talking to us about implementing best evidence, best practice. We can barely manage to provide practice. So I completely understand that, and it's something that we are very cognizant of. So thank you.
Thanks very much for raising, Peter. Any other questions from around the floor? No? Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your insights. I wish you well in your exercise adventure, and thank you for such an engaging presentation. We really valued it. Thank you. Big round of applause. Okay, we're moving into our next session now, which is looking at the big picture. Why best practice spray applications strengthen sustainability credentials. For this session, I'd love to welcome Gordon Cumming, who is with GRDC. Gordon, come on up. I'm going to introduce you as you're walking on up.
I want to know what you found out about me.
I Googled you.
Oh, God.
He likes long walks along the beach. Just kidding.
I don't, trust me.
Gordon is GRDC's Manager for Chemical Regulation. He grew up on a farm in Victoria, studied a Bachelor of Applied Science in Rural Technology, and he's held jobs with Incitec, Crop Care, FMC Australia and Pulse Australia. He now manages GRDC's investment in the chemical crop protection space. How'd I go?
Pretty good. Yeah.
Boom. Over to you, Gordon.
Google. All right.
Let's make him welcome first. Great to have you here, Gordon.
Thanks, Melinda. And I guess a couple of things. One, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, so I'm not quite sure how I got this title about, as Melinda just said, big picture, best practice spray application, strengths, sustainability credentials. So like any good presenter, once I work out the technology, I promptly changed the title. But I suspect, and I'm hoping, that you'll see the link by the time we're finished, that really sustainability is about, at the moment, social licence. It's about trust, and it's also some of these market access influencing things. And bottom line, it's about the right to farm. We believe we have the right to farm, don't we? You know, that's why we're here, and we've all grown up with it. But does the rest of society have the same picture, and are they supporting that belief and that right? Okay, so the take-home messages, look, yeah, social licence can't be taken for granted. I'll harp on about this a bit, but it's our single biggest threat to our sustainability at the moment, I'm believing. Pesticide application beyond the label can lead to, well, you heard me get roped in earlier on before lunch about carbendazim and haloxyphop, but not doing the right thing puts at risk that environmental damage. What we are currently seeing, you know, the Overwatch examples, the 2,4-D examples, I think Mary said it, canary in the coal mine. And that's what they are, they're highly visible. Now, I started my career with spray seed and gramoxone. You want to talk about highly visible herbicides and drift and off-target damage? It was a fun period of time 30 years ago. We've still got the same sorts of challenges though, unfortunately. And the residues in that grain, your neighbour's grain, but what about, okay, you know, bad thing to say, the grapevines, this part of the world, the stone fruit, the carrot grower, you know, anything that's going outside of your paddock, as Andre was saying before, it is a risk, environmentally, visually, socially, and particularly trade. And we're getting more and more pressures, as you'd be aware about trade, what the EU, you know, the EU is starting to dictate the way that we actually have a right to farm. So these things are gathering momentum, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, I'm just trying to set the scene a bit. and the ineffective application of those pesticides resulting in significant label changes through government regulation. So we've all just lived through the 2,4-D label changes and reviews. If you want to scare yourself, go have a look at the APVMA website and have a look at the list of products that have been identified for spray drift review. Not tox, not environment, not efficacy, spray drift. And I stopped counting after I got to about 40. Now, there's no time frame on that at the moment, so we may never see it in our lifetime, but it is a real pressure. So just because 2,4-D's been done and we've all switched to MCPA, because it doesn't have the same constraints on the label, no, they're all going to go under the same microscope. Okay, so social licence, what is this thing? It's a term that we often use. So a few definitions here, but the level of acceptance of or approval that stakeholders and communities extend to project or whatever you're doing. So think about that. It's the stakeholders. Are we the stakeholders, or is the general community the stakeholder in what we do? Gaining social licence means gaining the support of those activities from those same concerned groups over and above the legal requirements. So just the fact that we're following the label, that's the legal requirement, is that gaining us social licence? Is society seeing us doing best practice and doing the right thing, as opposed to just what we legally have to do? And the granting of social licence rooted in the beliefs, reputation and opinions held by those same stakeholders. Beliefs. So the old saying, perception is reality. Don't let the facts get in the road of a good story. We are seeing more and more of that threatening our industries. And you start seeing this sort of thing. It's unfortunate we're a little bit bright in here today, but basically, you know, a flash in the media, 12 nasty pesticides banned everywhere else in the world, and Australia still uses them. And there's good reasons for why we still use them, and good just scientific reasons. But when you start seeing that getting flashed around social media, what does that do to the trust? What does that do to the social licence in the bigger community? And I guess the other comment I should make, and you're well aware of this too, is the massive disconnect between agriculture and the general community. I'm a farmer's son, but I didn't stay farming. My brother and sister didn't. I have 3 children. None of them are in agriculture. They at least visited grandma and grandpa a couple of times when they were little tackers. I now have 2 grandchildren. They'll probably never see a farm. So we have this massive disconnect, you know. Where does milk come from? Little Johnny says Woolworths, little Sally says Coles. So again, just doing the right thing, best practice, probably isn't going to be enough. All of that I just harped on about leads to that one word down the bottom, trust. And does society trust us as primary producers? And also, society doesn't think about grain producers or wool producers or cotton producers. We're all just farmers. We all get tarred with the same sort of perception. But do they trust us? Do we demonstrate, do we show, do they see the level of integrity and reliability and the commitment that we all have? I'm not giving you any answers, I'm just asking lots of questions to think about. Lots of words on this one, but the big take home here is, and it's often called the triple bottom line or the 3 Ps. So have a look at those bubbles on the right hand side. So bottom left is profit. And we've all been heavily focused on profit for a very long time. You can't be sustainable if you're not profitable. And I had that argument with a uni lecturer 35 years ago. He was a bit green in his thinking, and I probably lost the argument. But, you know, you've got to be profitable to stay there. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, whatever system you're talking about. More recent times, bottom right, the planet, the environment. So how sustainable are our practices in the long term with our natural resources, limited resources, all that jazz. The top one, people, social licence, society. If they're the risks to the current sustainability, I think, and it's relatively new that we've been thinking about it. So really, sustainability is all 3 things, the bit in the middle. And how well are we doing in all 3? And, you know, I'm sort of a scientist. I believe in a lot of data. I argue on data. Society generally, I don't think they're a lot more motive. They don't listen to science necessarily. I'll say a few more things about that in a second. So as GRDC, mid last year, released our sustainability initiative, and think about what GRDC stands for, Grains Research and Development. We're a heap of scientists, funding a heap of scientists to do really great work, which leads to better sustainability. But out of those three bubbles, it's that social one which we don't really play that much. I mean, yes, we have some investments in that social science space to try and understand some of these things, but it's a pretty new sort of area. What we do though is focus on, what have we got here? The preservation, enhancement, avoidance of detrimental environmental resources. So water contamination, soil erosion, reduce pesticide use, reduce residues in the environment, reduce impact on non-target organisms. So if we're following best practice as producers, we're ticking off a lot of these things. But is it being seen? Is it building the trust that we need? Technical boffin, got to have a graph. There's a heap of investments and dollar values. Great stuff, fantastic stuff. That disconnect between our industry and society. How many people see that? And all of those things, if you read along the bottom line, if you can, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce erosion, reduce salinity, they are all sustainability focused, but they're the bottom two bubbles. What about the top one? So the next couple of slides I actually stole, Belinda, from Ag Communicators. When you find a good thing, steal it. Absolutely, yeah. It was from a presentation that Danielle Lush gave in the Adelaide Updates about 2019. But this one here and the next couple about social licence, trust, freedom to operate. So it's the privilege of operating with minimal formalised restrictions. So think about legislation and bans and all that fun stuff that may be coming our way. Either those restrictions are either regulatory or based on maintaining public trust. And if you focus on, yep, I've got the right bubbles, good. The right-hand side, well, freedom to operate, which is what we want, to farm the way that we believe we should be farming. It's built on social licence, but social licence is built on trust. And where is that trust coming from? So then that's the bit on the left, where there's basically saying that there's three factors influencing an individual's level of trust. So there's the influential others. So, days gone by, that might have been immediate family, immediate friends. Now it's this thing called Twitter and Facebook. Competence. So relating to the science and the technical capacity, but whose science? What's the relevance of the science? What's the credibility of the science? Again, social media. And this thing around confidence and shared values. So do we actually share the same values as the rest of society when we're talking about our farming systems and practices? And do they know? So just looking at the shared value thing again. So what drives consumer trust? And yep, bit of research showing that, in fact a lot of research, that shared values are 3 to 5 times more important to building trust than shared facts. I work for GRDC. What are we? A pack of scientists. I like data. So what we do is we generate a heap of data, a heap of science, and it's called fact, and it's on the right-hand side. And we try and get, that message across. People don't believe you, so you generate more data. You argue on data because we're scientists, when in actual fact it really doesn't get you very far. You think about the GMO debate, very hot debate in this state as well. Quite surprised at times, or people are surprised when I say, do you know what the first GMO crop was? It was a tomato, or one of the very first ones, a tomato in England, flavour saver tomato, which meant you could pick it when it was ripe and it's stored longer. So now when I buy it, it actually tastes like a tomato. No GMO backlash whatsoever, because the output, in my opinion, was for a benefit for the consumer. Whereas most of the other GMO are input driven. Society doesn't really care about that. They're interested in what's in it for them. So the shared value takes a lot to build. Arguing the case on science probably doesn't necessarily win the day. and yet it's, you know, it's my background, it's what I do. So you quickly listed there, I tried to list some of those shared values as primary producers with the rest of the community. Yeah, we are committed to protecting the environment and our land, sustainability of the environment, producing quality food, caring for people, our employees, our staff, our local towns, safe and affordable food, food security, humane treatment of animals. You go bail up any Tom or Freddie on the footpath and have the conversation, they'll agree with all of that, I'd suspect. And I think all of you would agree with it. But they don't see that connection. What they do see is that. One mistake, and we never got, or I never heard the background of where this came from, but beehives wiped out with fipronil. Whether it was spray drift, whether it was something else, don't know, they could never pin it down. But one mistake massively undermines that great big purple shared values box. That trust is so fragile. So we've got to be doing the right thing. We've got to be seen to be doing the right thing. Do it right or lose it. Court of public opinion. So, you know, Mr. Judge there is the Twitter sphere, and you've got 140 characters to get your message across. That previous image does it very well in about 60 characters. I'll pull out a 120-page technical report. So, you know, that isn't going to work in the current way that people get their information. Society gets their information. Here's one for some of the older ones in the room. Anybody want to hazard a guess to what that picture is? Yes, excellent. Melbourne, 1983. I'm in third year high school in Geelong in the gymnasium, like this, and it went pitch black. And that was the reason why. So when I get bailed up at Saturday barbecues, little side story, I repartnered about 10 years ago, whole new social circuit of group of friends, none of them from agriculture. Hey Gordo, what do you do? Yeah, well I'm one of those people who spent 30 years doing research into these things called crop protection products. They're not called pesticides, by the way, they're crop protection products. Note it down. Oh crap, it's on. I have this picture on my phone. So I showed them that first. So yep, 83s, you're all picked. What were we doing back then? Burn, bash, bury, min-till. Oh, that's those hippie dudes. Compared to that picture. Min-till, I mean, God, if that was conventionally cultivated, that slope, imagine where all that topsoil would end up in a good rainfall. So one of the great success stories has been min-till, protecting the environment. Yeah, there's all sorts of things you could say about that picture, but yeah, it is a fabulous success story. And even when I came back to the Wimmera Mallee in the mid-90s, I'd still drive from Horsham to Swan Hill with sand drifts going across the road in the Mallee. We were still putting fences on top of fences because of the sand dune that was blowing up against the fence. So this hasn't been around very long, but it's a fantastic success story. Does the general society understand it? They still think we burn, bash and bury. So that's the second picture I show them. And then I talk about this. So that whole system, not totally, but very significantly relies on effective weed management. It relies on crop protection products. Without them, the system will collapse. So the debate is not about whether or not Roundup is good or bad, or we shouldn't be using Roundup. We need to use that system, min-till, because of all those shared values around the environment, around siltation of waterways, water quality, the pink dotted tree frog that lives in that water that'll suffocate because of all the dust that ends up in the waterway. That's the discussion that I'm having on weekends, not about banning glyphosate. Glyphosate's just a tool that we need, and therefore obviously want to retain it. But the shared value is not cheaper inputs to grow food, it's protection of the environment. And even interesting when I saw that photo, which is all about skull and crossbones, banned Roundup, have a look at the paddock in the background, conventionally cultivated. So if we get rid of Roundup, are we back to that? Now, again, preaching to the converted, But that is how I've approached those conversations with a beer in my hand in a whole different social group that knows nothing about agriculture. And I reckon I'll win over probably 4 out of 10. But it's 4 more than I had at the start of that barbecue. And I think, oh no, last bit, I had to have something in here about best practice, didn't I? Okay. So building trust, doing the right thing, seem to be doing it. Old soap horse, I guess, only use registered and permitted products because all those environmental risks have been assessed, market access has been assessed, human health has been assessed. Yep, a lot of them are under threat, chlorpyrifos, we've lost it. Probably rightly so. I did treat my lawn for lawn grubs with it 20 odd years ago, and my kids are fine. But yeah, it's pretty nasty. We need to find better solutions. But as an industry, we are committed to doing it, I believe. You guys as well as everybody else. But this whole she'll be right, mate attitude, and I did it 20 plus years ago. Client has an issue. I know I can solve the issue. Is it on label? No. What are the risks? Can I get away with it? Probably. Let's do it. Goes to the question a bit before with, 22 being so wet, and I'm up against it. We all get pushed into corners. But more and more, that is just, I'm afraid, unacceptable. And God forbid you get seen doing it. So lots of questions, lots of statements, no solutions. But I think probably as an industry, we need to think about how we message and position this whole social trust situation. So thanks, Belinda.
Thanks very much, Gordon. Okay, so building trust, social licence. How about I open it up? What do we think? Do we have questions about, well, what's happening? Okay, over there, thank you.
Yeah, so my question probably comes, I'm just sort of thinking about our industry and other industries and other industries that sort of have similar sort of issues, and I think about the mining industry, they don't have trust in the public. Mm-hmm. However, what are they doing in their field that we could sort of adopt to maybe, is there anything we can take from their journey? And I know there are a lot of the time they've got the benefit of working up in Whoop Whoop and people aren't looking at them. So, but yeah, anything we can work on there.
From that specific example, I actually struggle to think of one. I mean, there is some, the way that they do their land reclamation afterwards. Again, growing up near Geelong, the old Portland cement factory, go and drive past there now, the factory's all long gone, but what used to be the big dump of all the topsoil and everything, it's a beautiful wooded ridge. People go bushwalking there. Dust mitigation is fairly topical up. I live up near Toowoomba, so there's the Ackland mine very close to us. So there's a few things there. So I really haven't got a good answer to that, but I think we can look at some other things. Look at what MLA has done with meat. Maybe some of the wool examples as well. Mulesing, I haven't heard about that debate for quite some time, maybe because they just gave up on it. But the general answer, and like I say, this isn't my area of expertise. I don't know why I got this topic anyway. We're just not doing it. But do we go around or go and do a multi-billion-dollar TV campaign ad? MLA have to some extent. Is that going to make that big a difference? I really don't know. My biggest fear is it's that one newspaper article that you see each year just undermines every effort that we seem to be making.
Another question, yes.
Apart from the EU, as an industry, are we more worried about social licence than the majority of our customers in China and Indonesia and India?
The immediate answer in my mind is yes. I was the manager for Pulse Australia for 10 years. I used to have a saying, I don't eat the bloody stuff, but anyway, that's beside the point. The Indians are hungry, so they want our commodity. They want our lentils. They want our chickpeas when they don't put a bloody great tariff on it. So yeah, but don't get complacent about that. The Chinese banned Australian barley for a long time. There's issues around sorghum as well. We're still trying to get sorghum back in there. Was it political? Possibly, but they use these sorts of reasons to do it. So when it suits them, they will happily do that sort of thing. And the other thing is, the likes of India and Pakistan, as they become more affluent, they will start demanding more and more things. And then you get things like of Egypt. You know, most of our faba beans go to Egypt. Yeah, they default to the EU MRLs. So even though they want the beans, their regulatory system has that default. So yeah, I'd say we're a little bit more concerned than the main markets for some commodities, but certainly not all. And as that general level of affluence increases and quality of living increases in that Asian subcontinent space, this will come more and more under the spotlight. Vietnam's basically said we will not accept any Australian mung beans, big market for mung beans, with glyphosate residues. And yet it's a third world country. So don't get complacent.
Mick.
I'm actually not going to ask Gordon a question. What I'm going to do is there's only one person probably in the room that sees us differently, and I'd ask Anna if she'll just make a comment. Does the grape industry, does the wine industry respect the grain growers' social licence, and what is your opinion? Do you trust the broadacre grains industry?
Thanks, Mick, for dropping me in it. Hi, everyone. So yes, I, for my faults, manage the Clare Valley Wine and Grape Association, but I, like you, are from a farming family from Auburn, and interestingly, I haven't heard muck and boodin mentioned for 20 years since, 30 years ago when I was doing ag science at UWA. But so I do come with both hats on. And certainly, yes, respect the social licence. I think since I started with the Clare Grape Growers in 2012, and we've worked with, through the Mid-North Spray Drift Committee, we've worked with the grains industry since then to really look at ways to minimise spray drift. As you're all probably aware, Clare Valley gets hit every year through inversion drift. We get 2,4-D herbicide damage, which you can see over there, which Mick brought. And we really have supported education for a good decade now, and also worked really hard with PIRSA to ensure that there's better compliance and enforcement, because we do respect the social licence, but we want the people that aren't doing the right thing to, be pulled up. So that's the approach we've had. But in saying that, we've also worked hard as the wine industry, because I think you'll find that the majority of complaints to PIRSA's rural chemicals hotline is against vineyards. So it's not just a grains industry issue. And certainly we've worked really hard in our own education. We run annual spray application workshops each year. We do herbicide one year, fungicide the other, just to ensure that our members are improving their own practice as well. But as far as the 2,4-D issue goes, we are the canary in the coal mine. Yes, you can see it, and I think, like everyone says here, that's not just the issue. It's the whole issue that there's a lot of chemicals in the air, and we all have to do better to keep them in our paddock. So I respect your social licence, which is mine as well, my own family, and our own. But I feel that publicly we are under pressure. And certainly in the wine industry, we export, a lot of our export markets are into the UK and Europe. So maybe our markets are more discerning about chemical usage, but certainly a big topic for us. And as far as our industry goes, there's a fair bit of economic impact with the 2,4-D at the moment, particularly in the establishment of new vineyard. Most of the damage is in young vines, and our members, after sort of 15 years, really are asking the question, does there need to be some restriction with 2,4-D? So it's certainly a conversation that's been happening, but, I'm not sure it's the answer, but there we go. I think that's it.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for that update. And Mick, thanks for throwing it over to Anna so we could hear from the wine industry. Were there any other comments or questions while we've got Anna here as well?
Excellent.
Gordon's like ready to make a run for it. Now, Gordon, I think just to wrap it up, on the trust side of things, what are we taking home? We need to do the right thing. We need to have conversations with our neighbours, show that we care. The big one Deanna says when she does the trust in ag stuff is listen without judgment, because if people haven't been to a farm before, how do they know what we're doing and why we're doing a certain practice? So listen and understand what they're seeing on their side of the mountain and have a values-based conversation and talk to them. We're not educating, we're sharing and having a values-based discussion so they know what we're up to, and we need to do the right thing. Have I summarised it, Gordon?
I reckon you've summarised it very well. The only thing I would add is be prepared to change. You know, we're not there to win every battle. Unfortunately, we will have to change.
Mary, did you want to make a comment there? I saw a smile from you. Do you want to chuck something in? No? Sam, were you putting your hand up as well? No? Peter?
Look, I think this is an opportunity just to present some challenges for grain producers, GRDC and grain growers. And this is just a formal little note from another agronomist. Mm-hmm. And John has got a copy of this, and some other local government people and state government people will get it. And it just goes on about challenges for summer weed control, confirming our discussion and the challenges faced as an agronomist and for you as a farmer with multiple land uses in close proximity. We continue to see the challenges for broadacre customers across our business footprint, from urban encroachment, horticulture, viticulture, organic producers or tourism. Changes in land use seem to be constant, and with this we have increasing pressure on all forms of agriculture to minimise off-target application of both fertiliser and pesticides. This is certainly something as a business we support, and that is to minimise off-target drift and take an active role in the stewardship with our customers to minimise the risk. In the past, the fallback for summer weed control in challenging landscapes was high rates of glyphosate with other group spikes. These mixes gave variable results on weeds like prickly paddy melon and the rate of glyphosate resistant in weeds such as fleabane, with no option to safely use group I's. Herbicides, yes, glyphosate is an important part of summer weed control, but the increased costs in these regions as we move into the use of more paraquat as a double knock. Hopefully we keep paraquat, that's my comment. The adoption of expensive chemistry like Basta or Amatrol T is adding additional cost to summer weed control. There's comparisons of 2 litres of Roundup Power Max at $70.50 a hectare, 2 litres of glyphosate, depending on brand, $37 to $70 per hectare, 4 litres of Amatrol at $60 per hectare. Note additional costs for adjuvants and mixing partners. The concern I have as an industry is that we see actives like paraquat come under review, which we've talked about today, and forecast loss of other actives coming years, which further impact broadacre agriculture. And that was from Peter Wendt, agronomist, who gave me permission to read that today if I had the opportunity. But I guess the challenge has come that there's been so many changes of land use without consideration for pre-existing broadacre farm businesses, and increasing pressures on us to minimise drift and put bufferage at our cost, even though the new business comes adjoining and they don't have to put up the bufferage. These are challenging times, and obviously the additional costs for us as a pre-existing business aren't acceptable.
No, thanks, Peter. I've got no comeback, because I think a lot of that, or if not all of that, is very pertinent. That whole interface of, you know, different primary fusion systems, and as you alluded to there at the end, you know, the grain producer was there first. Old mate's bought up next door and decides to do whatever he wants to do. He knew damn well what he was getting into. So I'm getting a bit personal opinion here as well. I'm going to say it's not GRDC's role, but that comes back to local council and planning and lots. So it's an extremely complex situation, which I think we all recognise. Yeah.
Yep, the regional development boards and GPSA as well. Yep.
Stuff I know absolutely nothing about, but yeah, I agree with the sentiment. Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Peter, for that. And Gordon, thank you again. You can now escape. Okay. So we're now moving on to our panel session. This session is looking at, well, it's called Whether or Not, the Role of Weather Stations in Optimising Spray Application. We have 4 speakers, so I'd like them to come on up here. And can I get the GPSA team, are you happy popping the chairs up on the stage for me? And while they're doing that, I'm just going to introduce you to them. So, Damon, where are you? There we go. This is Damon. Damon Grace is the General Manager of the Cottle Mesonet. This high-spec weather station infrastructure was set up with government funds with a specific aim to combat spray drift by providing safe spray weather data to growers. The Mesonet now provides real-time hazardous inversion data and covers half of SA's cropping region. So Damon, welcome. Nice to have you here. I'll then introduce Leet, who's sitting down on my left. So Leet Wilsh is an ag technologist with an agronomic background in grain production. Growing up on the family farm at Yalana on the EP, he learned a great range of technical skills doing vehicle bodybuilding, and he did a vehicle bodybuilding apprenticeship before completing an advanced diploma in agricultural business. He had a 17-year career as a research agronomist. Hang on. It's a long one, Lee. Hang on. With Landmark and Nutrien, is the current chair of AgX Alliance and the founder of AgBite, which is a weather, environmental and soil moisture sensing distributor company. So Lee, welcome. And Jonathan, hello there, Jonathan. How are you? We might recognise Jonathan from TV, from live weather crosses, so it's lovely to have you with us today. Jonathan is a meteorologist with the Ag Decision Support Team with the BOM, and he's one of the Bureau's media spokespeople, so it's lovely to have you there as well. And Claire, where's Claire? Come on, come down the front. What did you say? Okay, cool. Come on, come down the front. Claire is the team lead of Agricultural Decision Support and is a meteorologist with the BOM. She's been with the BOM for 25 years, working across Australia and internationally in her role. So great to have you all here. Now we've got the 3 up on the stage, so I'm going to start with some questions. Damon, I might start with you. I'm just going to pop this down. Okay, Damon, let's start with you. We have a few questions from the GPSA team and then we'll open it up for wider discussion. So Damon, weather stations are a critical tool when it comes to spray application. Can you run us through how the hazardous inversion data from the Mesonet can inform grain producers about when and when not to spray?
Sure thing, and I was kind of expecting this, so I came prepared.
What?
Because rather than me trying to explain what a website looks like, it'll be a lot easier if I just run you through it. Now, knowing me, I've got the anti-Midas touch, so there might be some tech issues. Oh no, it's actually working. So yeah, this is a real-time live demo of the Mesonet. We have up here hazardous inversion in the top left, so you can see that all the stations here, they're green, which means that there's no hazardous inversion. We try to make it as simple as possible because we know, everyone's drowning in data these days. So it's just a simple traffic light system. If it's green, from a hazardous inversion perspective, you can spray. If it turns sort of an amber or orange, then have a bit of caution. If it turns red, do not spray. We know that every farm is different, so you have to use your own common sense. Just because your closest station is saying green, it doesn't mean that you can. But that being said, all of these stations have been cited by meteorological modelling to be suitable across this, the suitable density for a vast majority of farms in the region. And this is not just a static map. You can go through to the data history. So if you wanted to know what it was during your spray trip, here you go. You've got the last 48 hours and beyond. So yeah, that's pretty much a live demo of how to use hazardous inversions for when you're spraying.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Lee, I'll hand on over to you. With a large weather station network, particularly in coastal areas of South Australia, what are some of the challenges you've seen with spraying for those who live in constantly windy locations?
Oh, there's always challenges with the wind in coastal. There's often challenges with wind in coastal areas, and I guess I find I am putting plenty of sites on, monitoring sites on farms that are close to the coast, particularly when farmers might live 5 or 10 k's away. And I'm constantly amazed at just the awareness that most growers, most of my clients who have weather stations, understand the differences in the wind conditions as they move further away from the coast. So they're able to interpolate data that might be at a site 5 or 10 k's away and use that information for paddock spraying to where they are at the moment. That being said, there's always that value of local information. So often there will be one site placed 1 year, and in the second and third year they might put in another site so they can actually have something that's more local for them.
Great, thanks, Lee. Now, tell us, how do you work across the landscape with the Mesonet team? What are you up to at the moment?
I guess Damon and I, we both presented last week at FMC's spray management workshops, which was a wonderful event. And yes, a shout out there to FMC team over there. He did a great job putting on those workshops last week, and I'm sure some of you would have seen some social media about that. Coupled with this day today, there's 180 or so growers went last week. There's certainly a really demand-driven part of the industry that wants to seek out more information about minimising spray drift. So good on work for you guys for being part of the solution. Damon and I, we have had a chat about where we fit into the landscape. Damon can certainly talk more about the Mesonet, but it's a high-spec weather monitoring network. I guess I fit in between all the bigger sites where people are looking for more local data. Also have a pretty extensive range of soil moisture monitoring, so that fits into my sites as well. So Damon can probably comment a bit more on how it works.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yeah, I guess I view the Mesonet as infrastructure for the state, and that in the same way that if you have, say, a railway for the state, it doesn't mean that you don't need a car. So the infrastructure for the state in terms of, I guess, spray drift, what I think is the most efficient way to do it is to have a Mesonet of sort of a high-spec weather station network, which, as Lee said, that's not as expensive as the BOM, because that's why it doesn't exist, because that would be too expensive, but it does have that higher quality and longevity than some existing weather station networks out there. I've just lost my train of thought now. Yeah, and so I guess, yeah, sorry. And then, as we were saying, most sites should be covered by the Mesonet. Some may feel they're not adequately represented by their Mesonet station, and that's when private weather station providers, particularly AgBite, can come in, and they have inversion towers now available to fill in that gap in the market as well. So I think we are a complementary sort of system, to help farmers have the most options to manage their spray drift.
Beautiful, thank you. Now I'm just going to come up here. My eyesight isn't as good as it used to be. I did have there was a sticky note for you, Damon, and there was a question here, why is there no Mesonet weather station in this location close to the Barossa Valley? Can I throw that one to you and then I can cross out that question?
Yes, certainly. The Mid-North Mesonet was the pilot Mesonet. It was done maybe about 4.5 years ago. For whatever reason, it didn't come down this far. It was very centred much on the Clare Valley, and it's been a success in the domain that's been around. For what it's worth, we are preparing a submission to expand the Mesonet on the Eyre Peninsula, York Peninsula, into the Barossa, so this location right here and the upper north, to take the Mesonet statewide to really get that full statewide infrastructure effect. So yes, we are looking to come here because we know this is an important area.
Thank you. Now another question from the GPSA team. Many grain producers across South Australia don't have access to a weather station network with hazardous inversion data. Is there a way that growers can understand when to spray and not to spray using weather forecasts and patterns? And Jonathan, I'll throw that one to you, please.
Thanks. So firstly, start off by saying Claire and I are not experts at spray drifting, but what we are kind of here to help is hopefully provide some insights into some of the weather conditions and climate conditions that might be more conducive to inversions. And so when we talk about, I guess, inversions, I think it's important to also look at different timescales of what we can and can't forecast. So, everything from, you head out in the morning and you want to know, is there inversion, up until the next 7 to 10 days, or even kind of the long-term space, looking at the next few months as well. So in terms of the, I guess, upcoming weather patterns, so that's when really the computer models start to come in. So I thought I'd just do a quick poll and see, how many resources do you all use? So, so who uses more than like 2 or more different like weather apps, like Windy or YR, 2 or more? Yeah, 1 or none? Anyone more than 5? So yeah, if you kind of looked at, if you look at more weather models, the more you look at it every day, you can see that, there are different models. There's the Access, the EC, the US model. They tend to tell a similar story sort of in the next few days, but after that, they can diverge and tell different stories. So I think no matter how many resources you are using, there's no one right or wrong answer. Understanding, first of all, the local weather patterns for your area. So we know for inversions, it may have been covered before, you do need clear skies, light winds, and also cool temperatures. So those are the things you want to look out for. And the weather patterns conducive to that are things like high pressure systems over South Australia. So when looking at your weather apps, if you're looking more than 5 days out, you might see that the Access model has the high pressure system over Victoria, but then the US model has a high pressure system over the Eyre Peninsula. So just kind of understanding that different models can tell different stories, but in that kind of 7 to 10 day space, just knowing what to look for can be really helpful. But as soon as we get out past 7 days and into the next few months as well, what we can start to look at is things like climate influences. So the past summer over South Australia has been quite interesting. Obviously, we've had the El Nino, which has been in the media a lot, but really importantly for South Australia, a bigger influence has been something called the Southern Annular Mode, or SAM. So that's where you get a bit of inland trough setting up over Victoria and New South Wales, and that draws in a lot of moisture off the Tasman Sea over New South Wales and Victoria. And unfortunately, because South Australia is to the west of that, you don't actually get a lot of that rain. So sometimes the trough will drift over to Keith or up towards Renmark, but further west over the mid north, sometimes you don't really get that coming through. And with that positive sound, we've actually also seen higher pressure over the Great Australian Bight. So that does mean also that you get fewer rain systems from the west, is what we've seen, particularly over the springtime of South Australia. So I guess, overall, just understanding, in the short term, what weather patterns to look for. So you're looking for the high pressure systems, clear skies, cool nights, but then longer term, looking at, what's coming up in terms of climate drivers. Are you expecting to see more warm days and warm nights, or expecting to see more rainfall? So those are the sorts of things that you can kind of be on the lookout for.
Excellent, Lee.
If I could just talk a little bit more about that understanding of what a hazardous inversion is, and I think there is still a real lack of information about even temperature inversion. I talk to lots of people that really don't understand the basics of it, and thank you, Mary, for your good presentation up here with your squiggly lines. I think that you've obviously done that a few times and explained what an inversion is. It's good to have it laid out so that people can see, that's why I hear things more clearly, or I see those layers of fog or whatever. So there's still in our industry, I think, is an issue around understanding what an inversion is, and then we get to the complexity of a hazardous inversion, which I suspect less than 5% really understand what hazardous inversion is. And Damon, you did make a great comment at the workshops last week talking about it even is a misplaced name, hazardous inversion, because it is about turbulence in the air.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. The misplaced name hazardous inversion, it comes about, I think, because of the APVMA has some legal wording which says do not spray during a hazardous inversion. If you don't know if it's hazardous, assume all inversions are hazardous. But as Lee said, what we're actually looking for in these conditions is not really the inversion. It's not really the temperature, being warmer above than below. That's not what's causing drift to happen. What's causing drift is the stillness or the lack of turbulence in the air. And so what a hazardous inversion actually measures, or that term hazardous inversion, is a measure of turbulence, it's a measure of stillness, and it's basically saying if it's too still, you shouldn't be spraying. Whereas the vertical temperature difference, also known as inversion, thermal inversion, temperature inversion, that's a signal that it's too still, because when it's really still, you tend to get warmer temperatures higher up in the air than below. So it's just I guess it's a more accurate measurement of that air turbulence. Yeah.
And it sounds like you've all shown, unfortunately I wasn't here for the morning sessions, but it sounds like you've all shown these aerological diagrams with the lines. So I thought I'd just show as well. So as part of aviation forecasting, the observer will release a balloon at Adelaide Airport every morning, and it does show the temperature profile. It does show the temperature profile at Adelaide Airport, and it can give you a bit of an idea of what's happening in real time. So it's released every day at 7 a.m, and the balloon measures the temperature through the atmosphere, and if anything, give a bit of an idea of what's happening in Adelaide. Could it also be happening closer to where you are as well? So definitely recommend taking a look at this if you get a chance. I'll just... Cool. So I'll show you how to get there. So just from the main page, you scroll down, and the right-hand side below Darwin, you click on Aviation Weather Services. You normally get like a bit of a disclaimer box, but just kind of press OK. Left-hand side, on the third one down, you go to Aviation Observations, and you want to click on Aerological Diagram, or F-160s as they're also called. And these are all the different sites that observers from the BOM actually release balloons every day, or especially for the major airports. And if you click on Adelaide, this will be the balloon that was released this morning around 7, 8 a.m. local time. So you can kind of see the red line on the right-hand side is showing a little bit going back to the left, and that's basically the inversion. You can see a bit of a cap there. So it gives you a bit of an idea. It's not a very strong inversion, Adelaide this morning, but nevertheless can give you a bit of an idea of what's happening further to the south.
Excellent, thank you. So I've got another question for you as well, Jonathan, while you've got the mic. In the last couple of years, we've seen a number of unpredictable storm cells travel over cropping country in South Australia. How do unpredictable weather events like this impact spraying?
Yeah, so we do know that Australia as a whole, and also I guess across the world, that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and also becoming more extreme. So if you think about South Australia, the one that comes to mind is 2016 September, that storm outbreak and the massive power failure across the state. That's probably the biggest one over the last decade. But even in the last few years, we've seen big storm events. We had a couple of tornadoes go through Narra Court a few months ago. And of course, we had the big flooding event across the Eyre Peninsula in December as well. So certainly for South Australia, these weather events do occur, and the evidence does show that they are becoming more frequent. So in terms of how that relates to inversions, I guess, so when we talk about extreme weather events, often we refer to things like heavy rainfall and also strong winds. And of course, when you do get stronger wind events coming through, it does mean that you do see fewer and fewer conditions conducive to inversions. But I think the other side of the equation is also often not talked about too much, your extreme heat events. So of course, over the black summer, you did get run of very hot days, and as these heat events become more frequent, what could happen is that you might reach that temperature threshold more often. So you might get days and nights which don't really cool down below 30 degrees, which of course does happen. I guess been quite lucky this season here hasn't been as hot as previous summers, but certainly we do know that summers are getting hotter. We are seeing more prolonged and protracted heat waves, and so that could also play a part as well as extreme events. And I guess we've certainly seen that rainfall can tend to come more short and sharp rather than being kind of spread out through the season. So certainly all that can kind of play into kind of fewer inversions in that sense.
Excellent, thank you. Now I'm trying to work through all of the post-it notes, and we're doing a pretty good job of getting through those questions. So one of the ones that came in on a yellow post-it was, how much legal clout does an on-farm weather station reading carry? And that might be one, Mary, you might want to have a say on as well, but can I open that up to the team here as well?
Yeah, I'm happy to start there. So most harvests, summers after harvest, when there's been a fire, I do get approached to see where my weather station was in proximity to that fire. I've provided data for court cases in that sense. I guess the sensors I put out have a margin of error. I've got to state what those factors actually are. And so data from my weather stations has been used in those cases, and spray drift as well. But that's got to be taken into context that the Bureau of Meteorology site might record data more frequently, might have a higher spec sensor, the mesonet sites as well. So it's better than a handheld Kestrel meter that's held up there, and it's way better than just guessing, oh, it was windy or it wasn't that windy. So they all hold different weight, I guess, but any on-farm weather data close to where the incident or the spraying actually was taking place is good data.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that as well? I
Sure.
know Michael McManus from Biosecurity SA is here, and he can probably better answer these sort of questions. But I'll try to paraphrase what I imagine he would say, and that would be that it is, I guess, in terms of a spray drift event, it is up to, like, I guess, the applicator to demonstrate that they used all the available data that was available to them to make that decision that there was no inversion or no hazardous inversion before they sprayed. So if there's, if you have a weather station on your property, you can use that. If there's a mesonet around you, you can use that. If there's none of these things around you, then I think Mary's talked about various other ways you can sort of try to assess for an inversion. So it's just demonstrating that you've tried, as a reasonable, practical person can, to show that it was safe to spray.
Over to Perza. Hello
Yeah.
there. It's Andrew.
Michael.
Michael, sorry. G'day,
No, that's
Michael.
all right. Yeah, Damon did a great job explaining the answer, essentially. So from a regulator point of view, what we're looking at is the mandatory instructions on the label, which say do not spray in a hazardous inversion. So we already went through that earlier today. So then we're looking for, as a regulator, well, what steps have you undertaken to ensure you don't do that? So that could be looking at a mesonet if that's available. It could be then not spraying overnight, because a lot of the labels actually say if you don't know if it's a hazardous inversion, do not spray overnight, because they occur most occasions overnight. So it's working your way down that risk profile. I guess ultimately what would happen is if we decided to take someone to court for potentially not following a mandatory instruction, a judge would need to then decide does that stand up? So is there enough evidence from the weather station data to prove there was a hazardous inversion? And a judge ultimately makes that decision. We haven't got to that point yet, but it is something that's likely to end up being tested if we find any kind of evidence that someone's been spraying in a hazardous inversion, particularly if we can, that's near a mesonet station, we can show it's a hazardous inversion, that probably will get tested.
Thank you for your comments. Mary, did you want to say something? You gave me the nod.
So there is actually legal precedent for the weather stations to be within the paddock, within 2 Ks, within line of sight. So handhelds are fine, but as an investigator, when I had one of those groovy badges that I could go and kick your door in and ask those questions, my first question would be, how did you determine whether there was or wasn't an inversion or whatever? And if you can't explain to me what an inversion is, then you probably weren't able to ascertain whether there was or wasn't one. So you can use a Kestrel, but I will look at, and I do this all the time, is look at all the other weather stations in the area and triangulate where you are. So if your Kestrel says the wind was going that way, and I've got 4 weather stations around you that say it was going that way, you're probably wrong. So there is legal precedent, but yeah, the more data you have, the better, and the better understanding you have of how you determine that. Now, I don't care if you went out and drove down the road and said the dust was hanging there, so I didn't spray. Beauty. Good enough for me, because you know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Mary. Jonathan?
Yeah, I guess just following up from what Mary said, just being even aware of the visual cues that there might be an inversion at your property. So yeah, dust hanging is a big one. And also fog. If you do see a bit of a layer of fog, it's a sure sign that a diversion has occurred as well. But also, I guess, understanding the sorts of conditions leading up to an inversion. So if you've got a really cold night coming up, it might be the first sign that maybe something might be happening the next morning. Or if you see, for example, if you look at the clouds, that can be a really great example as well. So during the day when it's quite warm, you see the cumulus clouds really start to grow, but as the sun starts to set, you see them really start to flatten out, and that's an indication that there's a bit of a substance inversion coming, and that could also lead to kind of more conducive conditions for inversion. So certainly a lot of visual cues that you can use as well, but as we were saying, weather forecasting as well, observations are king, looking at the observations and actually to determine whether there is an inversion. But yeah, there's plenty of great resources out there from GRDC as well about how to recognise an inversion if it's happened.
So that just raises a point around record keeping. So if you're making these observations or you're getting this information, what are the tips for record keeping?
Well, I'm not a farmer, but my colleague Peter is, and he says it's very easy to just, at least with the MESAnet, if you got it on your phone, just take a screenshot when you start and take a screenshot when you finish. You got it there, like, it's there on your phone forever. And on top of that, the MESAnet, I think most weather station providers now have the data sitting on a server, so you can go back and get that data when you need, in the same way that the regulator can go and check that data as well.
Yeah, I guess if you are keeping records, once you go through a couple of seasons, like in weather forecasting, it's all about pattern recognition and kind of, recognising the signs of when it might be happening. So just building up that knowledge as well over time.
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments from people out there on record keeping? Anyone got any good tips or tools they can recommend? It's your best defence, says @SprayDriftGirl. I like that. It's the best and only defence you'll have, so keep those good records. So we've had some good conversation. We've got probably 5 or 6 minutes left. Just want to open it up and see if anyone's got some questions they'd like to ask of our panel session. And I'm going to throw over here down the back. Thank you. Hello.
Okay, thank you very much. My name's John Nairn. I'm a director in Cottle. I'm the meteorologist in the room, and Mary was wondering whether I would shoot her. But I was going to have a quick shot at the use of the word still, because it suggests that the inversion can be occurring in very light winds. And I'd prefer probably that people didn't use the word still.
Sorry, John.
No, it's okay. It's actually smooth flow. The technical word is called laminar flow, as against turbulent flow, which will throw your droplets on the ground. Because still suggests that there's almost no wind. There have been inversions doing 25, 30 knots. So those conditions can occur. So it's actually smooth flow where there's no turbulence or very little turbulence. To clarify, because you can get inversions in a stiff wind, and that you should understand that it's not going to be just in the very light wind conditions. Okay, thank you.
Excellent, thanks for sharing. Did anyone else want to?
Yeah, I guess just to add to that, yeah, there's this myth, I think Mary sort of talked about it, that you can't have an inversion or a hazardous inversion when there's 11 k an hour wind. You totally can. If it happens for most of the night, then that contaminant or that pesticide in the air, just say that's 10 hours, that's 100 kilometres away already. So long distance spray drift does happen. It's happening in the Clare Valley. So don't think it's just this thing which doesn't make sense. It makes sense. So yeah, be aware.
Thank you. Further questions from around the room? Yeah. Sorry, go on, Rowan, you're doing well.
I'm sure this would stuff up all the labels, but we've sort of just heard, I don't know, one of you guys said something about, inversions, and it was a little bit complicated, late or even the MESAnet. Is there a possibility that you could install some sort of sensor to measure that turbulence?
Yeah, sorry, I obviously didn't explain it very well. That's exactly what we have done. So the inversion measures LEET's inversion towers, and the MESAnet measures inversions with the temperature difference. But very recently, the MESAnet actually has this turbulence sensor, and that's what we measure and report, and that's how we determine whether it's a hazardous inversion. Yep. And I guess in terms of what does that mean practically, some farmers are very happy with simply using vertical temperature difference. They think that's fine, and they have enough time to get their spraying jobs done. Other farmers say that's it's too restrictive and they can't possibly comply. So that's when they would probably want to use hazardous inversions instead, because you get more time, you get more safe spraying hours if you're going by hazardous inversions.
Yeah. So that was what I was going to ask again. Then so any sort of percentage data, do you think the difference is between the two?
Yeah, we did an analysis over a summer period. It was 3.5 hours on average per 24-hour period, or basically per night. 3.5 hours extra safe spraying time per night compared to using only inversions. And then if you're using inversions, you actually get more safe spraying than the general rule of thumb of 2 hours before sunset and 2 hours after sunrise. So every degree of extra granularity is buying you more safe spraying hours.
Mick, over to you.
It's just a bit of a history lesson to back up what Damon said. Back in 2014, and Peter's here, there were massive drift issues, and what the industry said to government was, we don't have any way, other than looking at the smoke and the dust, where farmers can't identify inversions. And even worse, they can't identify hazardous inversions. And the government, and especially through the efforts of Jeff Brock, said, we will fund a pilot study to see if this technology actually works. So the Mid-North Mesonet was a pilot study to see, and it's the first mesonet basically outside of the US, the very first mesonet in Australia. And the government has since said this technology does work. Other than that, we've got to go to each farmer and say, to abide by the law, you actually have to be able to measure turbulence. Now, you could go and measure turbulence, but you can't all afford a weather station to measure turbulence. So the government said, we will provide the funding for that as long as the industry pays for it in the long term, in terms of maintenance, in terms of the deliverables. And that's why Damon's team has a subscription to pay for all that and to get away from you guys having to go out and spend $30,000 or $40,000 each on a weather station that can measure it.
Comments? Damon, Jonathan, Lee.
Yeah, I guess this goes to the cost. The Mesonet is great infrastructure, and we manage that. As with any infrastructure, it does have an operating cost. I guess for some perspective, I think to get the data off the entire Mesonet, it's around $540 a year for the most expensive one. Gets you hazardous inversions. I've been told that a typical grain grower might spend $100,000 a year on agrochemical products per year. So that's less than 1% of your average spend on chemical to make sure it's sprayed properly. On the other hand, is it really fair that that small cost, yet annoying cost, sure, is it fair that that is 100% put onto usually grain growers, or should that cost be shared more equitably? That's beyond my pay grade. I think that's a question between growers, industry, and government. I'm not sure where those discussions are at, but the status quo or the default setting is that it be user pays, which essentially means the cost is on grain growers.
Mick, just to be fair, a hazardous inversion monitoring weather station is not $30,000. Sorry? A hazardous inversion monitoring weather station does not cost $30,000 now. Yep.
I guess the general gist is we wouldn't really want to see, make every farmer go and buy a hazardous inversion tower for their own property. It's much better to have an infrastructure and then have a private weather station provider fill in the gaps for those who want it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
So has the Mesonet made a difference to Clare Valley chemical trespass?
It's a good question, and very hard to, I guess, tangibly measure. Obviously, there's been some spray drift events both this year and last year, and the Mesonet has been around for that. It may have been worse if the Mesonet didn't exist, because we certainly do have some very passionate supporters and subscribers who do not spray during hazardous inversions or even just during inversions. So from that aspect alone, it has reduced, but it is one of those things where, what's that saying? Like, most of the people who come here, they're conscientious, diligent, they're smart, they care about spray drift. It's sometimes the people who are not here that are causing the problem. And that problem will continue. And also, as Mary has said, this is kind of a cumulative effect as well. So even if you're trying to do the right thing, but maybe you didn't get your Mesonet subscription, so you're just going by the sights and sounds and whatnot. It's pretty much impossible to not accidentally spray during an inversion unless you have the data. And even if you think, oh, I only did a little bit, that little bit of 1%, and then your neighbour does that 1%, it all adds up. So that was a long-winded way to say kind of.
Jonathan, Lee, any comments from you on that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fascinating just learning all about, all the technology that's being used to look at spray drift. And I think the key takeaway for us, for the BOM, is that, hopefully we can try to provide some insights into, even a bit of a heads up as to, if there are conditions coming in the next week or the next few weeks. So we release, hopefully some of you have come across them, some grains climate videos through GRDC. So these are just on our YouTube channel, but we try to be responsive as we can with these video updates, which go every 2 to 3 weeks, to try to look at, what kind of sensitivities and what's going on in the ground at the moment. So I would definitely work with Claire just to see, how we can, provide some insights coming up in the next few months, whether that's looking at wind patterns or pressure patterns, which might be more conducive to inversions over a longer period, or if there's any kind of particular events coming up as well. So it's absolutely a great learning experience from my point of view.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And Claire, you're over there. Any thoughts or additions you'd like to add in as well? No, you're good. Thank you. Lee.
I'll just add a comment that Damon made about generally the people in this room are not the ones that need to be coming here, or not quite like that, but you're generally the people doing the right thing and are conscientious. And there's a whole heap of people that aren't here that are the recalcitrants that keep doing the poor thing. That's going to continue to exist in my 25 years of ag and agronomy. That has always been the case. But what I do believe is that you all would have learned something today, and it gives you a bit more confidence that when you do see the wrong thing happening, or you see the lights or whatever, it gives you confidence to talk up to your neighbour and say, no, this is wrong and these are the reasons why, because you've learned a little bit more. I've been on a fair journey with the Harvest Fire Danger Index, and I think we've got an excellent code of practice and really good adoption here in South Australia. And that's been confidence of people who have learnt, they've understood the data, and they've teamed up with their friends and they've gone to someone who is doing the wrong thing and saying, you're doing the wrong thing, this is why, and the industry has improved. So I do have belief, and I am positive, that this forum, the ones last week, are all helping lift the bar. So we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. I think 4.5 years ago, I was doing some of these things for the Mid-North Mesonet, and we struggled to fill some rooms with like maybe 3 or 4 people. And now looking at everyone here and doing the FMC spray workshops with Leet and FMC guys on the Yorke Peninsula last week, that was 50 people at every location as well. There's clear momentum is happening in South Australia. It's happening in New South Wales, Queensland. Yeah, it's happening around the world. So hopefully that behaviour change to that initial question. It doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've come to the end of our session. I'm just going to throw to our speakers any final tips or take-home messages that you want to share in the role of weather stations in optimising spray application. Lee, any final thoughts?
That's a big open door there. I think everybody should actually have a really close monitoring site on their farm to help them make some decisions.
Well played, Lee. I like that. Thanks. Jonathan?
I guess, yeah, understand your weather and your location, your climate patterns. That will go a long way.
And I guess I'd say if you're in the Mesonet footprint and you either haven't subscribed or you don't have one of Leet's inversion towers, then you have no way really of knowing whether you're spraying during an inversion or not. And so the data exists, you should get on it. So, yeah.
I'll just add one more. So fortunate to go to a VOCAG in Western Australia a couple of weeks ago now, and there was a lot of talk around AI and where that's going to fit into the whole ag tech side of things moving forward. But as someone who's in weather and collecting 600,000 weather data points every day, I just think about where this immense computing power can go with Mesonet sites and BOM sites and private weather station sites for forecasting and feeding that data into these quite incredible models that we do have. Yes, sometimes they get it wrong, but the more data points we feed in there, the more accurate forecasting we're actually going to get. And I think we're going to see some real moves forward with that forecasting in the next, and the accessibility of forecasting in the next few years.
Totally agree.
Beautiful. Nice way to end. Thanks very much to Damon Grace, Leet Wilsh and Jonathan Howe for their participation in our panel. Can we please show them a vote of thanks? Thank you.